There are moments in life when you feel like you're living in someone else's story, a drama that you never auditioned for, a heartbreak you never saw coming. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how every brick of the life you worked so hard to build could come crashing down in a single, silent moment. I'm an ordinary guy, never one for big crowds or high drama. All I ever wanted was a quiet home, a loyal partner, routines that brought comfort. And yet, one evening, tiptoeing back into our house after another overtime shift, I overheard a conversation that shattered every certainty I had about love, devotion, and trust. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's the story of what happens afterward, when you realize you become someone's backup plan rather than their true partner. It's about fighting for your dignity when the person you trusted the most treats your loyalty as disposable. If you've ever found yourself sacrificing for someone, convincing yourself it's for love, only to discover you never really mattered in their plans, then stick around. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll walk you through the moments that defined my journey, the beautiful memories I thought would last forever, the subtle hints of growing distance, the gut-wrenching night when the truth surfaced, and the final, dramatic showdown that forced me to let go. Even when my heart was in pieces, I learned that sometimes you have to choose yourself, even if nobody teaches you how. This story will take you through hope, suspicion, heartbreak, and, ultimately, renewal. You may recognize yourself, or someone you love, somewhere along the way. If you do, I want you to share your feelings in the comments below. Don't just listen, join the conversation. Together, we're not just sharing a story. We're helping each other heal from the heartbreaks that come with life in the big city, where divorce, betrayal, and starting over aren't just headlines, but real challenges many of us face. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Enjoy the video. If you had looked at us from the outside, you'd have seen a couple who'd figured it out, a man with a steady job, a woman whose laughter could light up any room. We were that couple you meet at trivia night, half competitive, half flirtatious, our story beginning with wrong answers and right chemistry. The first time Sarah beat me, she leaned in with that sly smile, the one I was sure belonged on magazine covers, and whispered the answer to a question I never would have guessed. That night, she told me, sometimes being smart means knowing when to ask for help. At the time, it felt like romantic foreshadowing. I didn't see the irony until much later. We built our life in fits and starts. Renting first, pinning dreams to each new apartment, then finally pooling our savings for a little house with peeling paint in a neighborhood where you could still hear kids playing after dark. Every scratched-up floorboard, every midnight Home Depot run, was part of the story we told ourselves. We're building something real. I worked my way up from inside sales to regional manager, long hours, phone pressed to my ear, spreadsheets growing like weeds. She became the heart of our home, teaching yoga when she felt inspired, picking up design gigs that paid just enough for weekends away or new art supplies. But even the sweetest story has its cracks. There were tiny moments, at first, barely worth mentioning. Our schedules didn't quite line up. I'd wake up groggy at 5:30 a.m. to catch a client call. She'd still be sketching logo ideas at midnight with candles burning low. Sometimes I'd come home to laughter echoing off the walls. Sarah and Monica, her best friend, sharing a bottle of wine and some Netflix drama I'd never understand. Monica was the kind of person who always knew the latest gossip, who would look at your shoes and tell you exactly how your week was going, and her loyalty to Sarah was absolute. I liked having her around, until I didn't. Looking back, small frictions became fault lines. I didn't see it then, but there was distance creeping in. A quiet envy, maybe, when Sarah talked about her freedom, her days unmoored from alarms or deadlines, filled with yoga mats, sunlight, and the warm, open spaces of possibility. I used to joke that I was the supply chain, and she was the dreamer. Most nights those jokes felt harmless, but every once in a while, the laughter sounded forced, even to me. And then there was the prenup. I told Sarah, on our third date, about my fears of getting burned like some of my co-workers had. I just want us both to be safe, no matter what," I said. She agreed, with that same easy smile, promising that love didn't need to mean risking everything. But there was a flicker, in her eyes, almost imperceptible, that made me wonder if I'd planted a seed of distrust, long before the storm. My parents called most Sundays, checking in, asking if we'd started talking about kids yet. "Give it time," Sarah would say, settling in for her weekly phone call with her mom, who always wanted to know if I was treating her daughter like a queen. I thought I was. I really tried. Even when Monica shot me those sideways glances, half joking, half judging, about how much I worked, I brushed it off. Still, sometimes in the quiet, I'd lie awake beside Sarah, listening to her breathing and wondering if she was dreaming of something bigger, brighter, or simply, something else. That's the thing about cracks, you never know how deep they run, not until the storm finally comes and everything falls apart. But that's skipping ahead. The truth is, before betrayal has a face or a name, it appears as silence between two people lying in the dark, each convinced they're the only one who feels lonely. And sometimes, the worst kind of heartbreak isn't caused by a single event, but by the 1,000 tiny moments when love begins to feel like obligation. The turning point was subtle. There wasn't a fight, no slammed doors, all it took was Sarah's laughter as she described the latest transmission issue with her old SUV, and how she wished for something more reliable. She'd shrug, managing a half-smile, "It's not a big deal. I just want to feel safe driving again." And maybe it was the way Monica chimed in, teasing, "You deserve the kind of car that doesn't leave you stranded during a thunderstorm." It was innocent enough, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, I could feel the narrative shifting, my role morphing from partner to provider, from confidant to cash machine. I made a quiet vow that night. I'd pick up every overtime shift, every weekend job, every after-hours service call. Packaging lines don't care about personal problems, they break, and people like me fix them, no matter how late or lonely the work becomes. Every additional dollar I earned, I tucked away into a mental folder called Sarah's Car Fund. It felt, at first, like doing something loving, something that would prove I was invested not just in us, but in her happiness. Maybe it was a throwback to my father teaching me real love was about sacrifice. Maybe I wanted to prove Monica wrong when she joked about men buying forgiveness with car payments. But sacrifice has a weight the world never prepares you for. Weeks blended into each other, 70-hour marathons fueled by bad coffee and the heady cocktail of adrenaline and resentment. The warehouse floor became my second home. I'd get texts from my friend Jessie, one of the old guard at work, "Man, you're going to burn out. Is she even noticing how hard you're hustling?" I lied and said she did. I needed him to believe it, so maybe I could believe it, too. I'd come home exhausted, dropping my keys quietly, so I didn't disturb Sarah and Monica's wine nights. Sometimes, laughter poured down the stairs while I microwaved dinner for one. Sometimes Monica would glance up as I walked in, offer a polite, "Hey," and return to whatever secret joke they were sharing. A few times, I sat in my truck outside the house for an extra minute, just to avoid feeling out of place in my own home. The car fund became more than dollars and cents. It became a marker of my worth. Every penny stacked against my own anxiety. What if I couldn't provide enough? Was I losing her, one overtime shift at a time? I started to notice how Monica always seemed to be there when Sarah was feeling low. Her presence filled the spaces I thought were reserved for me. My mother called one night, her voice warm and familiar. "Don't let work become your whole story, son. People need love more than new engines." I promised her I was fine, but the truth was, I was running on empty and didn't know how to replenish myself. There were little moments of confrontation, never loud, never messy. Sarah would say, "I don't want you working so much," and yet, the next day she'd message me a link to her dream car, a certified pre-owned Outback with all the bells and whistles. I'd say yes, swallow the knot in my throat, and head out the door in the dark for another long shift. The house grew quieter. The routines we'd built started unraveling, replaced by missed connections. Jesse took me out for drinks one Friday, tried to get me to talk, but all I managed was a half-hearted joke about living in the break room. He told me, "Don't let her needs kill your own," but I've never really been good at drawing boundaries. Sacrifice is a funny thing. It can look heroic, but sometimes it's just a mask for desperation. Looking back, every overtime hour was a bargaining chip for the love I was so afraid of losing. I kept telling myself, one more week, one more paycheck, one more chance to make her happy. All the while, the gap between us widened, and I failed to see how the relentless grind was becoming my prison. My story wasn't just about love, it was about surrendering yourself, piece by piece, in the hope someone will notice your absence. But the grind always collects its payment. And as the silence at home stretched longer, it was clear my sacrifice wasn't buying security or affection. It was just fueling the distance. It started with little things, almost laughable if they hadn't cut so deep. A text message buzzing on Sarah's phone just a little too late at night. The way she'd jump slightly when I entered the room, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. Monica's name popping up more and more in our conversations, their wine nights extended to weekend getaways that I wasn't invited to, and honestly, never wanted to be part of. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't I the one working those long hours? Wasn't it fair for her to have space and friends? But some nights, the silence between us screamed louder than any argument ever could. One evening, I pulled up after a site visit, arriving home hours earlier than usual, a rare break in the grind that felt like a cruel twist of fate. As I crept down the stairs, I caught snippets of a conversation, barely audible but unmistakable. Sarah and Monica, voices low and urgent, planning something that wasn't a party or a project. "Timing," Monica whispered. "You have to move carefully." Sarah replied, voice hesitant but resolute, "Maybe this is the moment to see what else is out there." It hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, is she talking about me? About us? The conversation felt like a map I was never meant to see, revealing a betrayal that wasn't just physical, it was emotional, strategic, premeditated. That night wasn't about angry confrontations or dramatic scenes, it was about standing frozen in a doorway, heart shattering piece by piece, realizing your entire world has been quietly dismantled. I chose to walk away, to sit in my truck and gather what little composure I had left. The hurt wasn't just from the words I overheard, it was from the truth they so clearly spelled out: I was no longer enough. In the days that followed, Sarah's behavior changed. She started dropping hints veiled in righteousness, a need for space, a desire to find herself, and the classic line that still stings: "I love you, but I'm not sure I'm in love anymore." She framed it like some grand existential crisis, but I saw through the facade. It was a twisted justification for plans she had already set in motion. I reached out to Monica once, trying to find answers in the middle of the storm, but she deflected with practiced ease, playing the supportive friend. Yet, beneath their smiles and cozy wine nights, I sensed a partnership that was no longer innocent. My closest friend, Jesse, tried to keep me grounded. "You can't fight shadows, man," he said over beers one night. "But don't let this eat you alive. You deserve to know the truth, and you deserve better." His words stayed with me, but truth has a weight that can crush as much as it can free. The most painful part? Knowing Sarah had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I wasn't witnessing a moment of weakness, I was seeing the end being quietly drafted. That silence at home, the secret smiles across the room, it was emotional betrayal in its rawest form. And it left me standing on the edge of a precipice, wondering whether love was ever really enough. The story was far from over. What I did next changed everything, for better or worse. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, the choices I made would set this whole story on fire. After that fateful night, silence wasn't my friend, it was the battleground. I realized love alone wouldn't save what was broken. What stared me in the face was the cold truth: I had to plan my exit. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. The betrayal was real, deliberate, and while my heart ached, my mind had no choice but to become ice-cold. I sat down with my lawyer, a man who smelled faintly of old books and certainty. He explained the prenup's protections in practical terms, how it guarded my overtime earnings, safeguarded my career investments, and ultimately, how it gave me a legal shield. That moment, surrounded by precise language and steady advice, I felt a flicker of control in a life that had spun wildly out of it. But planning a divorce where emotions bleed into finances is never neat. I started quietly moving our savings. Money from those endless overtime shifts, into an account only I could access. Every dollar was like a brick in an invisible wall I was building to protect myself from the storm that was coming. The real challenge wasn't money or papers, it was manipulation. Sarah wasn't just a woman hurt, she began to wear the mask of victimhood. First came the subtle comments, about how hard this was for her, how she wasn't the villain. Then, things escalated, fake urgency in her voice, attempts to guilt me for my coldness, even a false pregnancy scare that shattered whatever fragile sympathy I had left. Monica, once a trusted friend, turned into an obstacle, orchestrating distractions, painting me as the heartless antagonist in a narrative of her creation. One morning, my phone lit up with a call from HR, a concerned voice carefully treading around my recent personal upheaval. Someone had reported me as emotionally unstable. I knew who was behind that call. I won't lie, it stung. The battle was no longer private, it spilled into where I worked, where I tried to hold on to normalcy. I felt cornered, caught between wanting to explain everything and knowing that anyone who heard the truth would only pick sides, add whispers, and complicate an already explosive mess. But I held firm, and in those shadows of doubt, I found an unexpected strength. Jessie, my unwavering friend, reminded me, you can't control other people's choices, only how you react. That became my mantra in the days when self-doubt threatened to pull me under. Sarah hit me with every trick in the book, weaving stories of desperation, of loneliness, of poor me. Yet, as the days passed, my resolve only sharpened. I was no longer just protecting my money, I was protecting my dignity, my future, and the possibility that I could someday reclaim my peace. The hardest moments weren't the arguments or the legal battles, they were the nights spent alone, wrestling with the question. How did love turn into calculation? How did hope turn into survival? The answer came slowly, painfully, because sometimes, the person you loved stops being your partner, and becomes the one thing you must outwit to save yourself. But the fight was far from over. What came next would test every ounce of strength I had left, and push this story into darker, stranger territory. Stay with me. The next chapter isn't just about survival anymore, it's about reclaiming life from the wreckage. The fallout was unlike anything I expected. When a relationship shatters, it's not just two people who suffer, it's everyone around them, the fragile circles of friends, family, and colleagues who suddenly become reluctant witnesses. I found myself caught in a wave of escalation that wasn't just personal pain anymore, it was public drama. It began with small disruptions, calls from HR, a vague inquiry about my emotional stability at work. The whisper campaign was subtle but effective. Someone close to Sarah, maybe even Monica herself, painted a picture of me as the unstable, controlling husband. I could almost hear the gossip swirling around the warehouse floor and in the break rooms. It was humiliating, but I held my head high, knowing the truth was mine alone to keep intact. Then came the phone calls from the mortgage company, strangers with questions about the house, inquiries I hadn't authorized. Sarah had started acting on her own, trying to gain control of assets she had no legal claim to. The sense of invasion was suffocating. It wasn't just our marriage breaking down, it felt like every part of my life was unraveling without my consent. One afternoon, our neighbor, a kindly retired teacher who rarely ventured beyond polite greetings, approached me with a story that chilled me. A woman had come to her door, claiming to be a social worker investigating a domestic situation. Polite, professional, but evasive when asked for credentials. The woman matched Monica's description perfectly. Monica, the friend, was crossing into something darker: harassment, manipulation, even impersonation. I confronted Monica, hoping to defuse the tension, but instead, it pushed her into denial and defensiveness. That conversation was one of the coldest moments between two adults I've ever experienced, words exchanged like weapons, trust shattered beyond repair. She claimed she was only trying to help Sarah, but I saw it for what it was: a campaign to destabilize me and reclaim control. Amid this chaos, I found small pockets of solace in friends like Jessie and my siblings. Their support was the lifeline that kept me grounded when the world felt like it was spinning off its axis. Jessie reminded me, more times than I can count, that my worth was not defined by someone else's choices. That sometimes walking away with dignity was the bravest thing you could do. Yet, beneath the courage, loneliness gnawed at me. The house we once called home was now a battlefield, and I was both soldier and casualty. Nights were the hardest, the silence screamed louder than any argument, and the absence of love was a hollow echo of everything I'd lost. But growth often rises from destruction. I started focusing on myself, rediscovering the parts of me I'd buried under work and worry. I took up running, joined a local community group, even sought therapy. A word I once would have scoffed at but now embraced as salvation. Healing became a quiet rebellion against the pain, a promise that this wasn't the end of my story. The legal battles dragged on, Sarah's attempts to claim spousal support rejected, thanks to the prenup, yet each motion delayed and drained us both. I realized the fight was no longer about winning or losing, but about reclaiming peace, about learning to live fully again despite the scars. And then came the moment I never expected, the one where Sarah, broken and desperate, reached out, not as the woman I loved, but as someone facing the wreckage of her own choices. Yet, as much as that moment stirred something deep in me, I knew forgiveness was a journey none of us could take without true reckoning. This chapter of my life was a crucible, testing every facet of my resilience. I learned that growth isn't linear, it's messy, painful, and fiercely beautiful. The storm had torn me apart, but in the shards, I found the raw material to rebuild. The finality of it all hit me on a quiet afternoon when the papers were signed and the echoes of what once was settled heavily in the empty rooms. It wasn't dramatic, there were no last-minute apologies or desperate pleas. Just the stark, unyielding truth that some chapters end because they're meant to, no matter how deeply you loved, no matter how long you fought. Sitting alone in the house that had been both a sanctuary and a battlefield, I felt the weight of loss like a physical ache. But amidst the pain, a strange clarity emerged. I wasn't just letting go of Sarah, I was letting go of the version of myself that clung to false hope, the man who sacrificed too much and forgot to protect his own heart. My family and friends became my pillars. My mother, ever patient, reminded me, strength doesn't come from never breaking, but from how we rebuild. Jesse was there with his relentless humor, pushing me to step outside the shadows and rediscover joy in the small things: a good meal, a morning run, a late-night laugh. Therapy sessions, once a source of hesitation, turned into a sanctuary where I unpacked the tangled threads of anger, grief, and self-doubt. The house felt different now, no longer a prison of memories, but a canvas for new beginnings. I painted walls with fresh colors, invited light in through clean windows, and slowly started weaving a life unmoored from the past. Sarah moved on in her own way, carrying the consequences of decisions made. Our conversation ceased, replaced by the quiet understanding that some bridges burn so completely they can never be crossed again. And though forgiveness seemed distant, I learned that it wasn't for her, it was for me. To free the parts of myself still shackled to bitterness and pain. The hardest lesson was accepting that love, as powerful as it is, sometimes isn't enough to save us from ourselves or each other. But within that acceptance lay the seed of hope, the hope that the future could hold peace, growth, and maybe even happiness. I began to envision new dreams, not tied to another person or shared past, but rooted in the simple promise of self-care and resilience. I found solace in things I'd neglected, friends who gathered without drama, quiet mornings with a book, plans for a fresh start in a city where no one knew my old story. And in those moments, I saw clearly, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning disguised as loss, a chance to rewrite my story on my own terms. So, if you're watching this and find yourself shattered by love or betrayal, know this: you are not alone. Pain carves holes in us so the light can come through. And from those cracks, we grow stronger, wiser, and more real. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Your stories, your courage, and your healing are part of this too.